College of Letters and Sciences. I'm standing in tonight for Dean Sirmo, who unfortunately can't be here. But I'm also here in the capacity of being Shanny Luft's colleague in the philosophy department. So I'm thrilled to death to be able to introduce him today. Before I introduce Shanny, I just want to draw your attention to these nice little brochures. The next talk in this series will be February 10th. Eric Larson from Geography and Geology and Susan Talarico from Mathematics will be talking about aspen, elk, wolves on Yellowstone Northern Range. I'm sure it will be wonderful. I encourage you to show up for this one as well. But for now, as I said, it is my great pleasure to introduce Shanny Luft, and I thought that in the spirit of the talk, I would read to you from the children's classic, A Visit from Dr. Shanny.
How did you get that picture of me up there?
'Tis some weeks before Christmas, and all through the College of Letters and Science, we promulgate knowledge. Professors like Shanny have learned lots of stuff, and they always learn more, like they can't get enough. So as you each nestle all snug in your seat, I can promise you this, you are in for a treat. Because Shanny is funny and smart. He's the kind of professor I'd want to put things in my mind. He thinks about Satan and movies and so many wonderful things that a person should know. I could easily listen to him talk all day or until he escapes and just scurries away. Since he came to the college in 2009, he's been teaching and writing and doing just fine. So I'm sure you'll enjoy this and leave quite a smarty with facts you can share at a holiday party. Be sure you remember your thoughts and suggestions because at the end he'll be taking some questions. But for now, I'll explain as I finish this rhyme. Welcome to Shanny Luft, and to all a good time.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Donna. Thank you very much, Donna. That's terrific. Can I have, is that mine to keep? A souvenir? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I'm really excited to do this. This is like one of the things I look forward to. I did a different talk on Santa Claus last year. I got lots of really great questions and had so many great conversations last year. And I have been reflecting on some of the conversations I had after the talk I did last year. And they influence some of the things I'm going to talk about today. So I'm really looking forward to your questions and your thoughts about what I'm going to talk about. Let me talk briefly about my title, Sacred Santa and Commercial Christianity. It reflects a little bit of the theme of what I want to talk about today and what I want us to be reflecting on, which is that I think there is a desire to try to separate out the parts of Christmas that we think of as popular or commercial on the one hand versus the aspects of Christmas that we think of as sacred or spiritual or religious or things that we venerate on the other hand. And so what I am suggesting in the title and what I want to argue today with you a little bit and kind of explore is my contention that the relationship between aspects of culture that we think of that are popular and the aspects of culture that we think of are religious are much more complex and difficult to sort out than we may at first imagine. All right, let's get started. So, modern commercial era of Christmas it's actually pretty recent. It doesn't begin in the 20th century, but it does begin in the 19th century, is where the Industrial Revolution and a lot of the tropes of modern Christmas get started. But one of the things I want to talk about first is what Christmas looked like prior to this period, right? Prior to the 19th century. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 1500s, the 1600s, some of the Puritan responses to Christmas. Then we'll contrast that a little bit with what happened in the 19th century and the early 20th century. Even before December became associated with a Christian holiday, the end of the year, this period of time they're in right now, has long been considered a period of indulgence. For a lot of people, December was associated with celebration and revelry, partying. People would get drunk, they would eat fresh meat, they would relax, they would celebrate. There was a lot of revelry always associated with this time of year. And namely, that has to do with the seasonal cycles of work, right, for most of our history. Animals that wouldn't survive the winter were slaughtered as soon as it became cold enough for the weather to keep the meat fresh. And so December was this period of time where people would eat fresh meat. This was the period of time also when the beer and wine would be, the year's supply would be ready. And so there'd be lots of celebrations associated with that. And of course, for farmers, this was a period of leisure, right? There was not a lot of work to be done. And so this time of year, long before it was associated with any specific or particular Christian reverence, was associated with celebration and revelry and partying. And this was not something that early Americans were particularly enthusiastic about. Many Puritans not only ignored Christmas, they actively sought to suppress it. And there were two reasons for this. One was Puritans associated Christmas with Catholicism. Right, we'll talk about St. Nicholas in a little bit, but he's a Catholic saint. And of course, Protestants rejected Catholicism, they rejected Catholic teachings, and so they associated Christmas with a religion that they were critical of. And then a religion that they thought was unbiblical. And then secondly, these midwinter celebrations that I've just been describing were, for a lot of people, like a frat party on steroids. The amount of kind of crazy, wild partying that would occur got at some point dangerous. And Puritans were sort of worried about people sort of overindulging, right, quite a bit. There was one Puritan writer who fantasized about bringing a lawsuit against Father Christmas. He wrote this book, The Examination and Trial of Old Father Christmas, in 1678. And he explained early in the book what his case was against Father Christmas, drawing and enticing them into drunkenness, gluttony, and unlawful gaming, wantonness, uncleanness, lasciviousness, cursing, swearing, abuse of the creatures. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Some to one vice, some to another, all to idleness. And the whole book is this like legal case where Father Christmas is put on trial and they blame him for all of this. Well, some of you in here might be thinking, and what exactly was the problem with all this? But for Puritans, it represented everything that they worried about. And so in the 17th century, Puritans worked through Christmas and ignored it and downplayed it altogether. One of the typical reverential parts of, that were associated with December was what was called mumming, which is shown in this illustration here. So mummers would show up at people's houses. Sometimes they'd be wearing masks. Men and women would exchange clothes. They would very frequently be drunk. They would frequently be singing loudly. And they would continue to stand at your house and refuse to leave. Sometimes they would come into your house and refuse to leave until you paid them. It was worse than a frat party, because frat parties don't show up at your door and extort money from you to get you to leave, right? So this was obviously not the kind of thing that not only Puritans were upset about, but a lot of people were culturally concerned that this kind of free time was not something to be supported and encouraged. And so mumming in this celebration, what I like about this picture is these people are showing up here at somebody's house, and in the picture, you can clearly get a sense that the people here are relatively happy and they're trying to be somewhat entertaining. But I don't know, when I look at the picture, it always, maybe this is just my perspective, but when I look at it, it always seems to me like the image depicted here could easily tip over into a mob scene, right? And that's kind of what the point was, right? The mummers would come to your house and celebrate and be jolly, but they were there for a reason. They wanted alcohol, they wanted money, and if you didn't supply it, they would harass you, they would punish you. It was a little bit like what we think of today with Halloween, right? The idea of trick or treat is essentially what mummers were doing. So in England, for a period of time, Puritans actually passed a law that made it illegal to celebrate Christmas. But when I say illegal to celebrate, this is the thing that they saw as celebrating Christmas, right? It wasn't reverence for the birth of Jesus Christ. It was these kind of wild, out-of-control public parties. And the period was so infamous in the 16th century that one Anglican bishop said, Men dishonor Christ more in the 12 days of Christmas than in all the other 12 months combined. 200 years later, a Methodist evangelist in South Carolina wrote, Christmas Day is the worst in the whole year on which to preach Christ. But this is already in the 19th century, right? So, and I make this point to show that for a very long period of time in American history, Christmas was not associated with any kind of enormous reverence or respect, right, as a spiritual significant holiday. It was a party, and some people were enjoying it, and other people felt it was being enjoyed in ways that were completely inappropriate. So long before the tensions of modern commercialism, right, everyone around this time of year expresses anxiety about all the shopping and the commercialism of Christmas, but long before then, Christmas had all these other tensions built into it. There were tensions between Protestants and Catholics. Right? Protestants found the recognition of Jesus' birthday to be unbiblical. It doesn't say in the Bible he was born on December 25th. And plus, Puritans rejected this veneration of St. Nicholas. There's a picture here of the first Puritan governor who's kind of yelling at a bunch of mummers to try to get them to straighten up. And so there were, in addition to everything I've said, there were class tensions here, right? The kinds of people who were celebrating in the streets were depicted and viewed as a lower class of citizen, right? And so there were class tensions between the Puritans who wanted this day to be treated at least with some kind of civility versus the way that most people acted around this time of year, which was pretty wild. So what actually changed? What actually then caused Christmas to be saved? What I want to argue is it wasn't actually religious leaders, because in the 18th and 19th centuries, religious leaders did try to do things to attempt to make the holiday more serious. At one point in Boston, they had this idea in the early 19th century that if they closed down all the shops and all the bars, that would be successful. The people that owned the shops hated the idea, and the public hated that idea. So that went by the wayside a couple of years later. The other thing they tried to do was a lot of the celebration, as I said, didn't really have anything to do with the birth of Jesus or the stories depicted in Matthew and Luke. Around December 25th and the Magi and all the things we associate with the spiritual message of Christmas. And so one thing that over the course of the 19th century, Puritans and Christians in general thought they could do is if they emphasized the religious aspects of Christmas, it might decrease some of the wild partying and commercialization of that day. But it wasn't totally satisfactory because in this period of time, in December, Christmas was often associated with St. Nicholas. Right? St. Nicholas is a Catholic saint. He was said to have died on December 6th, which is his saint day. And there had long been stories since the Middle Ages about St. Nicholas coming to children's houses and leaving them some kind of treats. And so, in general, the too much association with the Catholic aspect of the holiday was something that a lot of Protestants weren't comfortable with. So what I want to argue then is that ultimately what began to turn Christmas into a day in which there was any semblance of piety and reverence happened in the 19th century. Because in the 19th century, the rituals around Christmas began to be associated with the home, specifically the Christmas tree and Santa Claus, right? Both of which directed attention back to people's home, and the Victorian notion of the home was identified as a sacred place, and that this was the thing that actually changed public perception about Christmas ultimately. Now, at this point, so either way, Christmas trees and Santa, I think, are both doing similar work here. I'm going to focus the rest of my talk, though, on Santa, and I'll begin briefly by just talking about St. Nicholas. So Nicholas was a 4th century Catholic bishop. There were lots of legends that grew up around Nicholas. It's a little unclear what can be said definitively, because during his lifetime, he wasn't as popular as he became in the 12th century, right, 700 years later. So what we can definitively know about what his life was like in the 4th century is a little unclear, but he became famous for being a staunch defender of Christian orthodoxy, and he vigorously opposed Christians that expressed incorrect doctrine. He was a forceful guy. He was not associated with the kind of sweetness and happiness and kind of constant joy that we necessarily associate with Santa. As I said, Nicholas died on December 6th, which became his saint day. Then after the 12th century, there began to be a Catholic tradition of St. Nicholas arriving and leaving little treats, oranges or nuts or fruits or something like that, at children's houses the night before St. Nicholas Day. There are also lots of legends that have been told about St. Nicholas, but the thing that I would emphasize for our purposes is this illustration was on top of a poem about St. Nicholas written in 1801. The part of it that caught my attention was not Nicholas standing here, but these two little kids in the corner who remind me a little bit of my actual children. What the picture is depicting is the little girl who's carrying, like she's got so many treats and oranges and fruits that she was given as a reward from St. Nicholas that she can barely hold it all, and so she's using her dress to kind of carry all these treats that she got. And then there's this little boy crying, holding the whip that supposedly St. Nicholas would have used to give him a beating, right? So St. Nicholas could be generous. On the other hand, he wasn't against distributing justice when a child earned it. And these stories about St. Nicholas began to blend into all kinds of other German and French and English folk stories that were being told about other similar kinds of characters, other spirits of this time of year. I want to, though, take a look at one of the earliest stories of Santa Claus in which we can begin to see the Santa that we're all familiar with today. But what I want to point out is all the ways in which he still retains some of the roots of St. Nicholas. This was a book. It was actually designed as a gift for children. It's called The Children's Friend, a New Year's present. In the early 19th century, people didn't tend to give Christmas presents. They tended to give New Year's presents. So even in 1821, it wasn't common to be giving Christmas presents to people. This was a gift for children for New Year's. I want to emphasize this book was a gift for children. 1821. It tells the story of this fellow. This is the first time that St. Nicholas, whose German name was a derivation of Santa Claus, is depicted with this reindeer. We don't know where the illustrator got this idea. This is the first reference to Santa Claus or St. Nicholas with a reindeer. And it's just an 8-page poem. I'll read you a couple of pages of it. Old Santa Claus with much delight, his reindeer drives this frosty night over chimney tops and tracks of snow to bring his yearly gifts to you. Wherever I found good